Evening.
Good evening, everybody. This is Rekha, and I'm delighted to welcome you once again to the Leaders Speak series organized by IMA. Ganesh, delighted to see you here, if not in person, on the Zoom screen. A warm welcome to you, and a very warm welcome to Mr. Dev Bhattacharya and Ms. Rashmi Ranade. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out and talking to our members. Just before I hand over to Ganesh, I would quickly like to acknowledge our knowledge partners, Brij Mohan Lal Munjal University. They have been a great support in helping us put together this program. So thank you very much. I'd also like to announce a special session with Mr. Amitabh Kant on 5th of May, which will be held from 6:30 to 7:30, and I hope you can join us for that. So with these words, over to you, Ganesh. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Rekha, and very good evening to all of you. And thank you for joining from all over the country. It's a pleasure always to talk to the AIMA and the LMA audiences. And I'm really privileged to have two outstanding panelists. So I'm as excited as you are, because Dev is actually managing multiple businesses in the Aditya Birla Group. And Rashmi is one of my favorite social entrepreneurs and has done some really outstanding high quality work in the social space. And I don't know whether you people were expecting this, but we're going to talk business, we're going to talk social, and we're going to talk impact on society, because I believe that all of us as thinking citizens of the country should look at all these parameters, and that's what we will do. I'll start with a brief presentation just to set the context and then hand it over to Rashmi and then Dev. And as always, please feel free to post all your questions on the chat line. I'll be tracking the chat line and we'll be delighted to answer as many questions as possible, given the time. So I hope all of you can see this presentation. It says winning the war on COVID. And we're really going to address three things. The whole concept of relief. I'm sure all of us in our various cities are doing whatever we can to do relief. But remember that hopefully on the 4th of May, we see a full or at least a partial startup again. I mean, the unlockdown, as the new English word is. And then we have to think about recovery and think about resilience. So the purpose of my presentation in the next 9-10 minutes is to just share some thoughts on what we have been discussing in various associations, various companies in society on how this process can work. So this is something I'm sure all of you know, so I will not spend too much time on this, but if any of you need this presentation, I'm sure Mr. Sanjay Grover can mail this to you. But what we are seeing is nearly $15 trillion of wealth being destroyed by one unseen virus called COVID-19. And in spite of everything that we are seeing, in fact, in India, of course, the stimulus, thanks to our fiscal position, has been less than a percentage point, whereas in, let's say, Korea is mid-teens, Germany has put 20% of its GDP into stimulus. Net result is our economy will be, our recovery will be painful, and we all have to be prepared for that pain. ILO, as you know, has warned about almost 190 million people will be laid off because of the crisis. There's already an expectation by end of this month, 55 million in the US itself. Today's announcement, of course, is even more scary, that 1.6 billion non-formal sector jobs are at risk, which is out of a total working population of 2.1 billion. This is almost 70%. Global economy expected to lose $9 trillion. I'm sure all of you watched the news yesterday or today, where you saw a 4.8% first quarter drop in the US. And this is only because of the last 3 weeks of March slowdown. So you can well imagine what could happen in this quarter, and the world could do much worse. Germany is already talking about 6% and so on and so forth. And of course, the biggest problem is that a partial opening of the economy could mean a continuous disruption of the supply chain. You could see a global food crisis. Unfortunately, we have the compounding problem of the migrant labor crisis. We all know about that, and I'm sure Dev Bhattacharya will talk a little bit about that, because both of us are very concerned and passionate about that area. And the migrating workers, in fact, if they don't find right options of getting back or getting support, could make COVID deaths very, very small in comparison. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, looking at a crisis which is of unparalleled proportions. What does it mean to industry? And I won't read through all this. I can just give you a few highlights. If you look at the airline industry, We know that domestic travel will happen. Already 1,000 people are in the, 1,000 flights are in the air in the US as we speak. But it's 100,000 people as against the normal of 2.3 million people. So it's much lower. And India also domestic travel will start. I wonder how many of us for leisure will really get into a long international for the next 6 months. It's not going to be easy. Energy and utilities, I think you've all seen the oil prices drop to almost negative to a barrel. Today, there are oil tankers around the world full, not being able to find a place to unload oil. So that's going to be a big crisis. Insurance, naturally, as you would expect, nobody expected this. So huge disruptions are expected in new business, underwriting processes. NBFCs and small banks were in trouble even before the COVID crisis in India. And today, I think managing the credit book, managing loans will be a key risk. And of course, like many other sectors, they're also looking at leveraging government support programs. And I'm sure Mr. Amitabh Kant and others will address that for AIMA as we go along. If you look at the sector I come from, information technology, the good news for the industry is that, if you must have read the TCS Infosys results, almost 75% people have started working from home. In fact, in some large companies, 90%. So we're expecting that this industry will be less disrupted. Having said that, this industry serves the real manufacturing and services industry. So if they don't recover, sooner or later, customers will start reducing work and so on and so forth. Healthcare, of course, is the big opportunity. But there is an impact on, as many of you have heard, because of the obsession with COVID, a lot of other procedures are waiting in line. There's a lot of impact on clinical trials. So COVID has literally taken over the healthcare world. We're hoping, of course, that Gilead or the Oxford University experiments will make good things happen. Let's wait and see. Auto industry, again, was down for the count much before the crisis started. And today, with macroeconomic factors, loss of jobs, migrant workers vanishing, they will be continued. And who is going to buy luxury cars in a situation like this? Apparel and consumer goods, again, a problem, because any discretionary category, which you don't really need to survive, is going to go out of the window for the next 6 months. And we're also finding that while essential food and health categories will have an upside, because of the disruption of supply chains, even they are unable to service the demand that is existing. So all in all, it's not a very pretty picture. So let me talk a little bit about some research we've done on the road ahead. That's what I talked about as relief to recovery to resilience. And we're finding that most businesses will look at a 3-stage process. The first stage, of course, is going on, where we are trying to see how much relief and how much capability we can extract out of our existing customers and partners and employees. Second phase will be recovery, and I'll talk about that. And phase 3 will be resilience. So to very quickly cover these, in the relief stage, or in the stage where we're all entering this, have been for the past 5-6 weeks, what we have seen is a good collaborative work culture. Anybody who has been able to implement work from home in services, particularly manufacturing, is more difficult, but we are seeing that culture. And of course, people are taking the time to address skill gaps, making sure that people learn better, etc. Processes are becoming much more connected. The role of managerial supervision, if you had 40 people working under your nose in an office, that's easy. But when they're distributed all over the place and you only have things like Zoom to connect up, it's not that easy. Financial, of course, I think everybody has to be worried about cash. It is a tough time. But again, we must avoid panic actions. This talk of mass layoffs, it can work in the US because they have payroll protection programs where the government chips in. But with the safety net as small as it is in India, we have to be very conscious as concerned citizens of the country that we don't cause more disruption than it is not necessary. Customers, I think I am seeing for many of the clients that we serve in our consulting company, that everybody is looking at key customers and making sure they can serve them better. So don't be in a hurry to worry about customer loss. Instead, focus on your customers and make it happen. And good companies have already made this happen. In the recovery phase, very important to assess what is the damage. I was doing some work with McKinsey 3 years ago, and we always used to feel that, look, in any crisis, the company that succeeds will be one that decreases 10% less than competition, which means you're not that affected. And after the crisis is over, grows 20% faster than competition. So the question you would ask yourself, especially if you're running a business, is, are you planning for the recovery in terms of evaluating the current impact and then growing from there? Wait and watch. I already said this before taking tough decisions. You may still want to freeze or defer new hires, You may not give increments or you may reduce the increments, but don't, as far as possible, try and avoid temporary salary reductions, eliminating people by panic. I think all that give a trust deficit to the organization with its employer. Eye on the bottom line, focus on cost. I've mentioned this. Optimize your operations. Don't do unnecessary activity at this time. Reevaluate your marketing and sales plan to align with the current business scenario. And of course, do what you can for the community. We have a large country of 1.4 billion people. However much we can help them, I think that would be very, very good. In the city of Pune, for instance, we are actually feeding 3,000 families today. And just by raising money from philanthropists, from people, whatever we can do in our little towns that we live in, I think that would be very, very useful. And I'm sure all of you are doing that. Finally, resilience. What we will see, and it's difficult to predict, nobody can really predict, I'm sure. I mean, everybody has his own view, whether it's Mr. Raghuram Rajan or Mr. Amitabh Kant, or of course our government. But all sectors will see some consolidation, which means players who do not have a differentiated value will probably shrink or will collapse. New business models will start. We will see a lot of collaboration with customers and co-creation of solutions. We see a lot of digital transformation. I mean, today when we talk about using Zoom, that's not digital transformation. I mean, it's just collaboration. But if you look at all the aspects of digital transformation that are available, I think everybody must see how they can use it better for your factories, for your businesses, for customer connect, employee connect, supply chain optimization, etc. You need to have a focused business strategy, as I mentioned earlier, to grow faster than competition. Revisit your capital plans, make sure that your capital is available irrespective of what happens, at least for the next 6, 7, 8 months, because we don't know how long this recovery will take, whether it'll be V-shaped, W-shaped, L-shaped, etc. So we need to be prepared for all contingencies. Grow, buy and sell, which means grow thoughtfully. If you can buy other companies, do so at the right time. If you're selling shares in your company, don't do it now because the value is not going to be good. And of course, we keep saying that the best way to predict the future, and in COVID, you can't predict the future, is to create it. Make sure you are ready in your business, in your organization to succeed. And let me stop by saying, in all businesses, vision without action is just a dream. Okay, and that is something that we all see. Action without vision, if we just knee-jerk and do various things because we are scared, we'll just pass the time. But vision with action can change the world. And I think it's a time for vision with action for all of us. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation. And let me quickly hand it over to Rashmi. And let me first give you an introduction to why we are doing this. As I said, it is India, much of the activities in the non-formal sector. I'm sure many of you know, though you may not have thought about it, that the second largest employer in this country is the artisan sector. And if they are not able to make or manufacture or sell, I think we have a much bigger problem on our hand than what we just worry about, which is manufacturing and services. And Rashmi comes from an outstanding background. I mean, she did her architecture in the JJ school. And following that, she did design from IIT Bombay and has been an outstanding social entrepreneur. In fact, she picked up a bunch of copper workers in a street called Tambatali in Pune, if any of you know Pune. And they've actually created an enterprise where world-class copper designs are being sold worldwide with the work they're doing. So I'm going to first ask Rashmi to talk a little bit about her own background and what she's doing, and also talk a little bit about what she sees as the future of the artisan as we go forward. Rashmi, over to you.
Thank you, Ganesh. We are Copper, spelled C-O-P-P-R-E, but COP, a social impact organization that works with India's talented handcrafting artisans. Copper is run by a group of 4 women co-founders. The first group of artisans or community that we started our work with were coppersmiths, and from there we get our name. So we set up Copper about 6 years ago because we wanted to do something meaningful with our lives. Meaningful for artisans, for better returns for them, and for a recognition of their talents and skills. Meaningful for customers who were looking for well-designed, handcrafted products that had an international appeal and were really quality wares and not, Emporia type handcrafted products. And also meaningful for us because we wanted to make a difference through our work. So 6 years down the line, I'm happy to say that we have been responsible for reviving the copper craft of Maharashtra. And not only that, we also in the past couple of years have started working with weavers from West Bengal, other metalworking artisans from Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Karnataka, and also some basketry workers as well. I'd like to show you a product that has been designed by us and beautifully handcrafted by our copper artisans. So it's a bedside carafe built in glass, and it's one of our most popular products. Our portfolio of products on our website, studiocopper.com. I mean, we have about 100 such products, which, most of them are designed by us and meticulously and painstakingly handcrafted by artisans. Now, to sort of market these products, we have set several marketing channels, and I will quickly read out some numbers for you. So we supply to 90 craft stores and boutiques all over the world. We have 55 institutional buyers. We've been on 25 marketplace portals and have taken our craft to over 10 trade shows around the world. Now, these are all firsts for this craft and for the artisans. In fact, one of our artisans was invited to Yale to give a presentation on a demo come presentation on the copper craft itself. And of course, we have our own online e-commerce web shop, which is studiocopper.com, with a customer base of around 55,000 people. So in a span of 6 years, I think we've gone all out to promote our needy and deserving artisans. Now, as I speak to you, I'm thinking that I'm talking of this work as if we are continuing it in the present. But actually, this present or this work that we've done so far has very suddenly become the past for us. So cut to the new present, March 2020, and we find that most of our retail shops, retail outlets have shut shop. Our exports have completely stopped. Our institutional buyers are silent, and that's probably because they're working from home. And of course, the most damaging is that the footfall or the sales on our own website by around 8%. Now, of course, this has meant that our artisans have been idle for almost a month and a half now, absolutely no work. And needless to say, this has also meant that we have been forced to learn to fly by the seat of our pants.
Rashmi, we're getting
So
a lot
how
of feedback. Can you come
exactly
closer
sort
to
of
your mic?
Can't hear, is it?
Yeah,
Can you hear now?
Come a little closer to your mic because you're getting feedback from your own voice.
Okay. Yeah. Where was I? I mean, what I was trying to say is that how are we planning? How are we tackling this scenario, and how have we put our plans in place? So we have to tackle this scenario, we have split our measures into short-term, mid-term, and long-term, or as Ganesh put it in a better way, a relief phase, a recovery measure, and resilience measures. So under our relief measures, it's a natural way of going about this. Under our relief measures, number one, we have used our good offices to procure for our artisans amounts of around rupees 3,000 per artisan per month, so as to take care of their basic sort of needs and comfort to their table. These are implemented by cash transfers. So people are, happy to say that, okay, I'm monthly to the artisan. But of course, we are only covering, let's say, 20% of our artists by this. And
Rashmi, you still have a very bad audio problem.
I'm putting up this forum here for people who would like to
Rashmi, your audio,
Okay.
yeah, your audio is not clear at all, please. Can you come a little closer to the mic?
I have earphones, but okay.
Okay, you conclude now and then we'll see. Because you were
Can you
talking
hear me
about,
now? Is it better
you were
now?
talking-
She
you were
can
talking
come
about-
back later. She
yeah,
can
maybe
come back
you
later.
should come back later, but because
Just check your audio because I think check your Wi-Fi. That audio might be a problem.
yeah, your audio may be a problem, but you were basically saying that, I mean, apart from the fact that you've done all this work with artisans, now the focus is more on relief to your artisan community and actually making sure that they stay alive, right? I mean, and right now there's a big disruption in the supply chain.
That's right. That's right. Am I clearer? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we'll try, but if it breaks, then I'll have to move to Dev.
Okay. So what we will is that under relief measures, we for those who cannot contribute, let's say to the amounts of 3,000 rupees, we have lower contribution possible, which is available on our website. You can go to studiocopper.com and you can transact a contribution like transaction. So here's another appeal that those of you who would like to contribute to these artisans, please do so. Is the audio clear now?
No, it's not too good, but I'll come back to you, Rashmi. So I think basically what we're saying is, and this is something, as I said earlier, ladies and gentlemen, it really, really worries us because even in places like the Ran of Kutch, I mean, there are so many outstanding artisans. I mean, I do a lot of work in the social sector, and all of them are now waiting for something to happen. And which is why I said earlier in my presentation as well, the biggest concern we have as citizens of the country is what's going to happen to artisans, what's going to happen to migrant workers, what's going to happen to daily rated workers, while we are more concerned about industry starting. If supply chains completely crack up, what's going to happen? So I'm going to move to Dev, and Dev, as I said, is both. I mean, if you look at Dev's background, he has been an industrial engineer. He has actually worked for Tata's. Then he was a film producer for some time, has dabbled in investment banking, and of course, for the last 18 years, has been playing various leadership roles in the Birla Group. And he has more width of experience than anybody I know. So they've talked to us a little bit about both industry challenges and a lot of work doing in the social sector now, and social challenges. And what do you think as a country, what should be our response?
Thanks. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
If I'm audible, then I'll go ahead.
Sure.
So, from the vantage point of large corporate, there are certain things that I see. And like Ganesh said, there are several other things that I see because of the social involvement that I have with right now with a lot of migrant workers in the north, as well as in Maharashtra and Mumbai. And also some deep involvement in agriculture that I have, as a result of which I'm seeing what's happening in the agriculture sector as well. But I'll first give you an overview of what I see from the corporate point of view and the different points of view that are coming from different sectors, and what is the overall outlook that I have sort of summarized for myself. So first point is that that many people say that take every day as it comes. When I say many people, I'm saying even companies and corporations and representatives from there are saying that, there is so much uncertainty that planning anything can go wrong. So at this point in time, what is it that we can do, which is even short to medium term certainty? It's a good point, but I think not taking a decision is also taking a decision. So you have to create a few scenarios and say, okay, if it is this, then this is what I do. If this is this, this is what I'll do. But in the meantime, there is some commonality between this time frame and that time frame, and therefore I can do at least some of these. So specifically, the work that I am doing right now, and as I am getting more and more information from different businesses, segments, etc., is that there is a minimum 3-month time within which we are expecting to hit some level of activity in the economy. And by 6 months, if we are lucky, we should be ramping up to a reasonably active economy, which is not 100%, but still a reasonably active economy. So if you were to plan for 3 to 6 months, what would you do? And you have to keep in mind that, we have lost 2 months, which means roughly, if you look at the Indian economy of about 3 trillion, each month is about 250 billion. And if you have lost, say, 80% or 60% or 50%, we are already down $150 billion plus. And we will lose another $150 billion if it is going to 2 months, and it is likely to be 2 months very soon. And then we will be slowly ramping up as we go, towards normalcy. And if some things don't go inordinately wrong, then we would have probably scaled back to some shape or form of normalcy by the beginning of next financial year. So all of us must be prepared for the fact that we have lost significant width in the economy, and which is, of course, the concern that the government has, that if you're going to lose about 10% of our overall GDP in terms of revenue, and then what is the space that we have to really kickstart it, and how conservative should we be? So it's a big dilemma. There's no doubt about it. Although many other countries have created the fiscal space, and a lot of people are urging India also to create that fiscal space and feed the demand side of the economy, because if you don't feed the demand side of the economy, there will be no buying. And if there is no buying, there is no kickstarting of the economy. So that is where I think the dilemma is, and hopefully things will pick up. The government will take quick action, and we will see some confidence building up in the consumer side of the economy. The other thing is that the migrant labor part, which I will come to a little later, but the fact is, yesterday there was a MHS circular saying that the students and migrant labor and people who have basically found themselves at the wrong end of the spectrum where they're supposed to be and where they actually are, can actually find ways to get back to where they belong and they want to be. And therefore that choice has to be brought into the labor force and the movement of people. From industry point of view, that's a bit worrying, because this is the time when you want to hold whichever sort of migrant labor or migrant workers are there still in the workplace. You want to hold them back, you want to give them incentives, you want to give them security, and then restart the economy. But if you suddenly start opening up the doors, the people who have been traumatized for so many days are likely to immediately board buses and trains and get back. And then to restart will be another challenge. So there are several discussions that are going on. How do we organize industries? Industries meaning whole supply chain of a business. So a corporate with its customers, dealers, and intermediaries and the logistics, etc. How do you get together and work with governments to remobilize workers who have gone back home, which is mostly people who are migrated to other places for work? So that mobilization has to be done more institutionally and sectorally as opposed to individually. I, as a cement manufacturer, may feel that I don't have migrant labor, but the dealers has, the construction sites have, the projects have. So we have to work with them to try to find ways to oil the entire ecosystem, such that the labor is back and the work is back in full swing. So these are some of the challenges, considering that there are so many unknowns still in the whole ecosystem, in the whole world, so to speak. And there'll be a lot of things that will be redesigned going forward. And there is some things that we talk about now: redesigning the workplace, redesigning the factories. How do we keep social distancing? How do you create restaurants with seating distances? How do you create sporting arenas with distances, with F&B areas which are not crowded? So these will require a lot of redesigning. If we are not able to find a vaccine within 6 months, as it is touted, and that's another story, that even if you find the vaccine within 6 months, to be able to deliver it to billions of people will take another 18 months at least. And it's still an IV form, as you know, and for it to become oral is another year. So these are things that are still unknown, but reasonably sure that even if they work, it will take 18 months for it to get delivered to reasonable number of people for you to feel confident that now you can get back to normalcy. So therefore, within these constraints, there are solutions that we have to work out, keeping a 3 to 6 months point of view, time frame, within which you will get back to some level of normalcy. And as a large corporate, we have to do this planning, and we are doing this planning. We can't sit back and say we'll see as as time flows and situations emerge, we will decide what to do. That's not a good decision for anybody, including small businesses, medium businesses, institutions, everyone. You need to plan. So that's something that you have to do, something that you've never done. You don't know, there are many uncertainties, but get down with your colleagues, with your teams, with customers, with intermediaries, get to dialoguing with them. Understand what their concerns are, issues are, share your concerns, issues, try to find joint answers, go to the government, state government, local government, central government, put your position forward, but give cogent solutions. Don't give, haphazard sectional solutions. I think that's what the government is getting a lot confused by. We need to give more cogent solutions. That's another one. The third thing is, people who are deeply involved in customer intensive businesses, or employee intensive businesses where customers get together. These are the things that you have to revisit your unit economics. How are you going to work in a restaurant where you had 100 covers, now you got to manage with 50? So how does the economics work? You have to renegotiate rents, you have to start talking about it, you have to take some hard decisions about productivity, mechanization, people. These are things that you've got to start thinking about. Start doing your research. If you're sitting at home, not having full view of what's going to be happening in the workplaces, we start doing research. If I have to mechanize, if I have to automate, if I have to reduce the number of people, what will I do? How do I reorganize? These are thoughts that you must start working on. So then coming back to the point about migrant labor, and Ganesh has already mentioned the challenge that we are facing. We are working with thousands of people. We're trying to urge the government to make PDS rations being available to them. Unfortunately, they're still not available. So we'll have to buy from the mandis in the market and give it to them. It's very difficult to sustain this. We're urging the government, please make PDS food available. Otherwise, these people are not going to stay. They're going back. If they're going back, till Diwali, nobody's coming back. And that's a big concern for most industries. So whoever is in a position to be able to influence the government to think rationally about this, one should push them. That, we have to give these people confidence that you are going to be supported for the next 6 months, 8 months. Money is going to go into your Jan Dhan account. You will have some kind of social security, and please go back to your workplace. This is an effort that everybody has to make. And at this point in time, till that happens, whatever little we can do to try and make their lives a little better, we should try and contribute. So with that, Ganesh, I'll give it back to you. If there's anything else that people want to know in terms of questions, I'll be happy to have it there.
No, I think one question, of course, is back to the migrant labor issue, which is that, you mentioned they may not come back till Diwali. And at the last count, there must be at least 2-3 crores of migrant workers who are either wanting to go home, already reached home, or halfway there, as we see on television all the time. So how do industries restart? I think it's a very important question somebody is asking, saying, okay, so what happens? If you were used to having 5 migrant workers and nobody's there, how do you suddenly find resources?
So I think there will be disruption. So we have to be prepared for it. My sense is there is about 20% availability at this time. 20% of the people are floating and available, and they have some level of comfort in terms of what they're going to get, because they've got some level of skill. It's the unskilled lot which is very difficult to hold, because they have no certainty and their fears are genuine. So what I'm saying is that there will be disruption. We have to be prepared for disruption. So a very difficult phase in the economy has already been entered into. So we have to hunker down, all of us. We have to conserve cash. We have to make sure that we have a runway of at least 12 months of funding and money available, so that we don't squander money expecting phenomenal growth, vertical sort of rebound, etc. Those things will not happen. So be realistic, conserve cash, take the tough decisions. And some of this migrant labor problem will be there for some time, till the state governments get together. Right now, state governments are very keen to send them out, because they know that there's social problem brewing. So the response of Telangana and the response of Maharashtra government is to make sort of transport available so that they can go back. But that is not the solution for industry, right? So, but that is a social situation right now. We have to be realistic that people have to be given the choice, the comfort that we are not, forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. So as and when we can get our act together, whether sectorally or government-wise, then we give the comfort for people to come back. So it's going to be a while before this happens. So we have to be prepared for a tough time within the economy right now.
So they have a lot of questions on, I mean, the two biggest victims of a slowdown. One is employees, and I'll address that because I'll do that later. But the other is small businesses, because the tendency for large companies is immediately to cut off payments. And somebody has asked privately that, look, even January supplies are not now being paid because our companies are saying they don't have money. So how does one deal with situations like that?
So, that's what I said. So you have to look at a 1 year runway of operating on very small revenues. And therefore, there are hard decisions to take. There is I think, a Supreme Court judgment or an advice. And of course, the central government has also advised that, try and not, cut people's salaries off or throw people out at this time. It's a very tough decision. It's a no-win situation for most people, but it is worst for employees. So I think, like many large corporates are thinking of, deferred pay, and they're looking at, sort of postponing the variable pay or asking people to take a voluntary cut and, then making good later. So this kind of plans will have to be worked on. There is no question. And the fact of the matter is, if you don't have revenues and you haven't created a good cash situation for yourself, you're going to be in trouble. So even now, people who are still thinking that, there'll be sudden turnaround and everything will be fine, that will not be so. So in terms of talking to entrepreneurs and talking to industrialists, I would say, please take the tough decision to conserve cash. Working capital is king. Be very careful about this. And for the employees, you have to keep your fingers crossed that your company is able to hunker down and reduce other costs and maybe give us a bit of a salary cut, but still retain your job. That will be the plus point that will hold the company in good stead going forward.
No, I think that's a great point, and I'll come back to the employment issue a little later. Rashmi, two quick questions to you. One is, of course, specifically on what you folks are doing, the wonderful work you're doing in copper, and then a slightly more general question, which I'll ask you. But let me ask you the copper question. I mean, you're working with artisans, you've made them increase their livelihood for the last 3, 4, 5 years, and suddenly we have a resilience problem. So what are you advising them? That even when the markets come back, the copper work that you do is very high quality, may not be domestic demand when there is low market for discretionary goods. So what is the resilience recommendation you're giving to your copper artisans?
Thank you, Ganesh. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So, in fact, there were many interesting points that they've talked about, and we have already sort of started implementing those. So one of them is that we've talked about a plan so that we may use of antimicrobial properties or self-cleaning properties of the milk copper itself.
Sorry,
so
again. I'm sorry, again, you have a terrible audio.
We're planning to bring out in quick
Sorry,
time products.
Rashmi, I got to interrupt you. You really have a bad audio problem. Why don't you do one thing?
Okay.
Just WhatsApp me what your answer. I'll read it out because we really.
Yeah, fine, sure.
Okay, so let me just move on to the question that's being asked some 40 times, which is what happens to employees who are all afraid of either salary cuts or getting fired? I mean, let me put it very bluntly. Even in an industry like IT, I mean, there are already companies I know, which I won't name, which have asked people to go on leave without pay till such time as the situation improves. There are companies which have said, look, if you're sitting on the bench, which means that if you're not on a billing project, we'll cut your salary by 50%. And this is an unfortunate reality. And I think Dave said it, and I don't think Dave was trying to be cruel, but he was trying to be realistic that business has to continue to be in business. Otherwise, most of the employees will not have jobs. So I think there are going to be some practical decision points that many CEOs and industrialists will have to take. And somebody asked that, look, if I'm an employee, how do I avoid getting the axe? I mean, that's something in the chat that somebody, the answer is very simple. You have to make sure that skills are such that people don't automatically look at you and saying, ye kya kar raha hai, isko bahar nikal do. So very important to be among, I would say, the top 20% to make sure that your skills are adequate. And this is not a one-off thing. So if you have a niece or a nephew or a son or daughter in this situation, just make sure that they are communicating, they are talking about doing extra work and making that happen. It's a tough market, ladies and gentlemen. There are no easy options. And it is a fact that there will be job risks. I mean, it's not for nothing that ILO predicted 190 million people losing their jobs. As I said, in the US, even perfectly good people are losing their jobs. So unless you're in really serious research, making things happen, there is a risk. So I think that's something that we have to contend with as we go along. Somebody asked a question on what happens to discretionary industries. I mean, if you look at the electronics industry, especially consumer electronics, if you look at the travel industry, I mean, people who are either building companies in that or have, let's say, a travel agency or an electronics showroom, which is shut and maybe the supplies won't come. How should they think of the future? Dave?
So let me give my view of which are the sectors which might do well and are probably doing well. So I'll start there. Then I'll talk about some of the opportunities that are coming up in smaller segments and think about how you can extend your business to go there, do something in that area. These are possibilities that you have to explore. First of all, agriculture is in vogue, right? Agriculture technology, agriculture, logistics, etc. There is going to be a boom in this area. There is going to be a lot of activity in this area. FMCG is going to get protected. Those are stuff which are going to flow, that there will be there might be a slight dip in a little while, but it'll pick up again. Then you've got e-commerce, which will ensure people are digitally engaged with the market and are able to. So e-commerce, as and when, this is the only country where e-commerce suffered. Everywhere else it has boomed in these times, but it'll come back. So e-commerce is another area. And, people who can latch into e-commerce, like I'm talking about, say, Studio Copper or many other aggregators of local capabilities, local industries, to be able to latch onto e-commerce sites and to be able to sell and distribute is an opportunity that will boom a lot more. Essential retail will come back and will do well. Then you've got pharma. You've got two-wheelers. I think two-wheelers and tractors are going to do well. And the two-wheelers, because public transport is going to be a little difficult for several months to come, years to come. So two-wheelers will do well. And second-hand two-wheelers is also a market that will boom in rural areas, I think. Insurance, healthcare, education, especially education technologies, and then thereafter microfinance, because I think village industries and rural industries will get a boost because of PMMY and several others, and people will be reluctant to move back into an uncertain future in an urban setting. And that's a subject for another day, how the urban workplace can probably change forever. But this is the large sectors. Then in the smaller segments, entrepreneurial segments, I can see content, especially social media content, getting a big boost, and you can already see it happening. Gaming is a big thing right now, and it'll keep going up. And I mentioned this to many others, that I'm seeing a lot of activity in the enterprise-based SaaS businesses. If you are anyway connected with it, you are in a good space. Then you have agri-tech, I talked about, transportation, logistics, and there's another area that I see emerging as a very interesting area, is labor mobilization. So a confluence between technology platforms and local contractors who will mobilize labor for different sectors. And so within the next 6 months, one year, 2 years, this will become a very important. Right now, there is a huge demand for someone who can organize labor. So do you have anybody? No. This is an opportunity. Who will be able to mobilize the right kind of labor in the next 1 year will be a winner. So if you are somebody in that space, that's your opportunity.
No, Dave, so there's a lot of questions coming up there. Mr. Sarma from Assam, for instance, asking a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Migrant workers have come back to Assam and
right.
still isn't adequate industry there. So with all the talk we've been doing in the last 10 years of reverse urbanization, too much of concentration in large cities, is this an opportunity, and will industry take Assam or Bihar seriously, saying, can you please come and set up your factories here? Because the labor is back here, they want to be close to their families, and can you start investing in these states? Do you think is this an opportunity?
So what happens is, industry or industrial agglomerates, they happen where there is urban infrastructure, there are facilities, there are opportunities, there is mobility. This is where actually industry and commerce moves. Industry and commerce never moves towards common labor. So this is a reality that people understand. Unless there are tax incentives and things like that, which makes people go and set up factories, and then they have a lot of trouble getting the technologically capable people to move, because people want to be in socially mobile locations. So that's why in developed countries like the US, you have 400 urban agglomerates and we have only 30. So this is the difference. No, now it is up to state governments. It is possible to create. It is possible to create an urban agglomerate with an industrial base or an entrepreneurial base, with a lot of incentives, with a lot of attractive opportunities for youngsters to stay back. It is possible. It is not impossible. But the natural force or direction is towards existing urban agglomerates if there is no direct effort by a state government or a government agency to create a separate, like for instance, the effort that is being made for creating the DMIC corridor or things like that, where you move people out from this busy and congested metropolitan cities to 20 such places where living and working will be a great opportunity. So these kind of things can lead to it, but immediately I don't see that happening. There will have to be migration again. This is bound to happen, except for the fact that people who have gone back and have been traumatized may try to create some workable solutions from whatever they have learned in their several years working somewhere else, an opportunity that might work in their own hometown. This is a possibility. So the PMMY scheme is meant for that people stay back, and these reverse migration actually is beneficial ultimately to the local economy.
And don't forget, and I think this is an opportunity for many of the LMAs whose heads are participating in this session. I think we should look at what is the core capability of our town or small city, and see what kind of employment generation can be created there. I completely agree with what they've said, that look, rather than waiting for the big cities to re-employ and send them back, some people will obviously go back. I think that's a great opportunity. I mean, somebody asked a question on UP is now rolling out the red carpet for people who want to relocate to China. Is that going to happen? Now, my only, and I don't want to sound negative, because we've been talking about, oh, India will get all the people who are coming out of China for the last 10 years. Vietnam did it. Thailand has done it. And both Rekha were in Ho Chi Minh City about 6 months back. And I know we know how successfully the government industry collaboration has happened to make Vietnam a very, very successful outsourcing destination. So there is a lot of work to be done. So will that happen at a time of crisis, that suddenly companies will relocate from Wuhan and Shanghai and Shenzhen and move into Lucknow and Allahabad? Not that easy. And I think we have to be a little wary about over expecting these things to happen as well. Rashmi sent me a couple of very good responses. I mean, she was saying what they are doing in copper, for instance, they are actually, because they were being, as I said, making very high caliber, high quality product. So what they're now doing is looking at some of the micro ingredients of copper, for instance, rejigging their portfolio. So antimicrobial properties of copper, self-cleansing properties of copper, and making solutions out of that. So the idea being that you may not be able to get 3,500 for a copper artifact, which is what they were getting. But if they can make multiple things which are useful to community, even to semi-rural segments for 250, 300 rupees, so you're changing the portfolio. This is exactly what all industries should do. I mean, rather than saying and worrying about the fact that, look, our best products are no longer being sold, whether it's electronics or travel. I mean, it's quite possible that the artisan community can start making products which are valid for India. Yesterday, we had a wonderful meeting with the IT minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad. And Ravi Shankar ji was saying the same thing. He said, look, why doesn't Indian industry collaborate on making products? Why not robotics for COVID? Why not artificial intelligence to check out in red zones what is happening? And he said, look, we can standardize on that in the government. not being protectionist and saying that, look, the large companies will not be able to play, the internationals, but at least to make sure that local industry gets a chance. So I think everything, I mean, there is, as somebody always says, a crisis is too good to waste. And in this crisis, I think, especially the LMAs and many of you on this chat should look at new ideas where, and as, I mean, local aggregation of labor, as they were saying, and see how we can make that happen. The other question I asked Rashmi on the WhatsApp was, look, so what is the future of artisans? One answer is what we just said, to make low cost products and services. But also I think, and Rashmi started with that, I think we should be able to support them. We must support the artisan community because this is a huge community. It represents the cultural wealth of this country and we can't just let it go waste. Let me address one different question. I think a lot of professors on this group are asking this question, saying that, look, what is the future of education in this country? One thing I can assure you, being in education skills for a very long period of time, that's not going to change. I mean, you will find that education will move to a blended learning format. So all the universities and the better colleges are already experimenting with multiple learning formats. There was e-learning before and what we used to call massive online courses, MOOCs, not very successful because they were not designed for this situation. But today there is motivation on the part of professors. There's motivation on the part of students to learn. Classes do some large social initiatives with the community schools in Pune. And we're finding that even the children in the slums in Pune are now learning through their parents' mobile phones. And even the teachers are much more motivated to make sure they teach them. And rather than just sitting in a classroom of 80 people, where only the first bench is listening to anything, here are people who are literally having eye contact and making that happen. So I think there is an opportunity and we should, again, like agriculture they mentioned, we should take this as a clear opportunity. But somebody's asking, I think, Mr. What is the future of students in the backward areas? Clearly, that is going to be a problem. And again, this is something we were telling the minister, the NOFN, which is the National Optical Fiber Network. It's been talked about for a long time. There has been a plan to have common service centers in all Gram Panchayats out of the 650,000 villages and the 250,000 Gram Panchayats. I think this is the opportunity for government to ensure that the fiber actually goes through. And if that happens, I think we will find that we are generating local employment because we are doing local learning and making people more self-reliant. So I think that's one important thing. Dave, we're running out of time. Can I ask you one question that I think a lot of...
Oh, let me just add to that point.
Yeah,
that,
please.
Life is not going to change absolutely, totally. It's going to come back. But you have to be prepared for the fact that, it will not be business as usual. So like in education, in classrooms, you will not be able to run crowded classrooms. You have to have spacing, you have to have the distancing. This is going to become the new normal because, till we reach a level of plateau in this infection control, this is going to be, and then it'll become habit because, who knows, another one hits in 6 months' time, 1 year time, 2 years' time, it can happen. So I think we'll have to be prepared for a changed unit economics world. So I'm only crystal gazing, but I think it will be true that, what you could cram with 100 students earlier, now you can only do 30 or 40 or 50 at the most. And therefore, how do the unit economics work? What will happen to rentals? What will happen to financing costs? What will happen to margins? What will be a good return? So I do not want to get into all of that. I have got a theory for all of this, but I think you have to be prepared for reworking all of these, and it'll still happen. Education will happen, like Ganesh was saying, it'll be blended in some way. Lots of other things will get blended in the same way, anywhere people tended to crowd together. But unit economics will change, and that is something that you have to keep in mind, while the basic model may not change entirely. Yeah, sorry, Ganesh.
Last question, Dave, is how do we get happiness back to society? We are a very afraid society. Salespeople are afraid to go out and sell. Everybody is worried about that virus will come and hit them. So any thoughts on that one?
I think, what has happened is, while, human beings are very social human beings, and I hate this term social distancing. There is nothing called social distancing. The only thing we are doing is physical distancing. But I can see that people can get closer if you communicate with them, you show your face. When you get to, when you're getting on a conference, please wear formal apparel that you would wear to a meeting, shave brush your hair, look proper, and look like you are ready to go. And when you meet up with your clients on video, etc., do it like, this is what you really wanted to do, and not like, unshaven don't do those things. So do the right thing, keep the social connection alive, keep the physical distancing, that's all. And keep your connect with your ecosystem, your customers, your dealers, your suppliers, all of them, as if, everything is normal. So that's the way to handle this situation. And happiness is an internal feeling, it's really up to you. You want to be happy with what you've got, you can be happy. You look at what's happening to the migrant labor, you should be very happy. They are the ones who have every reason to be unhappiness, but they are the ones who are the stoic lot. They're not complaining, they're not fighting, they're not writing. So look at them and learn as an example, and we have lots to be thankful for and grateful for.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left, so let me just answer a couple of questions. One is, there's a repetitive question on what will happen to the tourism sector. See, the tourism sector as it exists today, where people are traveling to various places, obviously you can assume that it is in a coma for the next 6 months. But having said that, we are investors in a company called LHI Digital based out of Mumbai. And they were doing culture, they were doing stuff which was actually encouraging people to go on cultural tours. Today, they're doing the whole thing virtually. They have now virtual reality platform where they can actually show you the same places, give you expert guides who will talk to you. So they're actually building a pent-up demand of people who will eventually travel. But today, at least they're experiencing it secondhand. And it's not unusual. If any of you have been to Iceland to see the Northern Lights, 90% of the people who go there will just be lucky to see a green haze, and they don't see all that wonderful moving blues and greens and oranges everybody sees. But when you come back to the capital city of Reykjavik, they'll tell you before you take your flight, please spend 3 hours at the virtual reality studio. When you go there, you'll see all those red and blues and with lovely cameras. And all that all of us do is we can take photographs there and post it on Facebook and say, this is what I saw. Okay. This is reality. And the point I'm making is, there are enough innovative opportunities to use technology. Rashmi just sent me a message saying that, look, our investments are going to be more in e-commerce in the next 6 months. A company which was doing very physical work with artisans is now looking at e-commerce, and they've mentioned it many times. So I think, to summarize, what are we saying? We are saying this problem is here, will not go away in a hurry. This problem is not the end of the world, as they've rightly said. Things will come back. Migrant labor who want to come back will come back. Whether they come back in August or post Diwali is something we have to figure out. But in the meantime, we should not panic. We should be happy because everybody is happy in comparison with some other segment of society. But we should ensure that as entrepreneurs or people with a strong management background in AIMA, we're able to find out how we can address the situation and make the best we can and be successful. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you, Dev, and thank you, Rashmi, for sharing your thoughts. And we look forward, of course, to new ideas coming. Somebody was talking about, can AIMA enable government industry collaboration? Of course, I think Rekha and Sanjay and everybody else do it all the time. And I'm sure the purpose of these webinars will be to come up with a new narrative for management associations. And as I said, all of you locally should participate in making that happen. So thank you very much, and have a good evening and a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.